ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the OER Dynamic Coalition webinar for the Open Education Week 2023. This Open Education Week is, as you know, an annual event in which different stakeholders share their best initiatives on open practices in the field of education. I'm especially pleased to see many participants from various backgrounds and sectors, including governments, teachers, students, researchers, civil society partners, libraries, archives, and museums. The 2019 UNESCO OER Recommendation really served as the catalyst for a global commitment to knowledge sharing. In 2021, the OER Dynamic Coalition was launched with the aim to foster international cooperation between stakeholders and share best practices in order to create synergies and networks in the implementation of the UNESCO 2019 recommendation. The coalition brings together stakeholders and experts from member states' ministries, UNESCO national commissions, IGOs, UNESCO Category 2 centers, as well as specialized agencies, civil society, and the private sector. The vibrant coalition that has now nearly 500 members, including 87 member states and 11 small island developing states. I know many of you are members of this coalition, and I would like to invite those who are not yet to join us. Since 2020, the coalition has organized nearly 40 events in different parts of the world. It is within the framework of the Dynamic Coalition that this annual session is organized each year. Chers participants.
Dear participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, UNESCO is committed to facilitating more open access to education. This effort requires the participation and support of the member states, of institutions, of civil society, and also of the academic community, in particular universities. With this multipartite approach in mind, the discussion on the accomplishments of the last 4 years since the recommendation on open education resources. This discussion has been made with a panel of contributors from many different horizons. This exercise is highly beneficial in several ways. The reports enable us to identify where extra effort is required. The data can be used as a basis for the conceptual approach, the establishment, the monitoring of strategies, and these reports can also highlight various areas of potential cooperation for the future. The UNESCO recommendation on open educational resources stipulates that the facilitation of cooperation is one of the key strategic areas in order to fully exploit the potential of open educational resources in order to support quality learning as well as knowledge sharing. I am convinced that the best practice that will be shared during this webinar today will be a source of inspiration for us all.
As stated at the UN Transforming Education Summit that took place last September in New York, fully implementing the OER recommendation is a critical step towards open solutions for truly inclusive knowledge-based societies. I am convinced that today's webinar is an important occasion for the open education community to engage with each other, to share best practices that will help us build a better future where everyone has access to open education resources and everyone can benefit from truly meaningful learning opportunities. I would like to wish you all a fruitful webinar and a successful Open Education Week. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jelassi. It's a great honor that you've joined us here today for Open Education Week, and we realize you have a very busy schedule, and we thank you very much for taking the time to speak at this event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The next speaker we're very honored to have with us is Dr. Carlos Alberto Pereira de Oliveira. Carlos is a Deputy Director of the Multidisciplinary Institute for Human Development with Technologies of the State University of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He's also a fellow researcher at the Laboratory of Technological Innovation and Health at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte, Brazil, and temporary external advisor for the World Health Organization's Academy Learning Strategy Group, Switzerland. Carlos will be speaking to us about some really exciting work he's doing in OER and health. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zeynep. It's an honor to be here with you. So nice that we have the opportunity at the Open Education Week 2023 to share some of our expertise in the use of OER for lifelong learning in the health sector. First of all, let me position you about the Brazilian situation using OER. We still have a lot of difficulties because we consider that OER has to be a government policy. It doesn't mean just signing a document that we are adopting OER. We need to prepare institutions. We need to qualify the teachers that they can use the OER. In Brazil, it is interesting to notice that we have about 5 million social workers in the health sector. We needed to qualify all of them in various areas in the health promotion, also health emergencies and health primary care centers. It was not such an easy thing to do as we go from the north of Brazil in the Amazon to the south, close to the Patagonia. So it's a huge country with so many difficulties and differences. That back in 2011, Zeynep, we came to a decision that it would be impossible to qualify health workers everywhere in Brazil, and also the communities that need health information and health knowledge, they needed to do it fast. And so we said, well, our golden standard, face-to-face, is not going to work. So back in 2011, before the educational arena in Brazil, we in the health area, in the health sector, started using technologically mediated learning with our professionals and communities. Now, back there in 2015, I was invited to work with the Laboratório de Inovação Tecnológica em Saúde at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte. There, we had our learning environment, which is called AvaSUS, where we put together information from different data from different systems of the government, so that we know well who our workers are, we know where they are, we know their results in the health sector, and then we can recommend that they take courses, that they read some new policy, or they get in touch with another professional that is working close to him in the same scenario. Also, we can invite him to join one of our communities of practice in the health area. At this moment, exactly at this moment, we have 338 active courses with more than 3,000. With all of them are available for free, completely open. Any teacher can download and use, adapt the material. Also, this material can be used by all the public sector in the health area and the private sector as well. To give you an idea, we have at this point 1,600,000 certification. So it means that certificates issued by the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte for health workers and the communities involved. Also, in the enrollment, we have more than 2,500,000 students. We want to get to a million students that are active in our platform and our learning environment. It's also very important to notice that all our OER is licensed Creative Commons 4.0 international share alike. So anywhere in the world can use the material. And it is in most of them in Portuguese, some of them also in Spanish. And we have some experience with Swahili. It was a very, very interesting Zeynep experience that we had. There was a group in Tanzania that they wrote to us. They wanted to use one of our courses designed for communitary health agents. And we said, we are not going to allow you to do this. We are going to visit you in Tanzania, and we are going to work together to adapt the OERs that you want to use. Because in the health area, one of the cases that we have to do is it's not just to translate from one language to the other. In the health area, sometimes you need to adapt, to adapt, to adjust the material to public policies of that country. So we decided to go there, and we made a wonderful group of courses, and they're still using them in Tanzania. So this is one of the things that is important, not only for Sustainable Development Goal 4, but also Sustainable Development Goal 17, when we can share our knowledge, our institutional knowledge, government paid, because all that we produce at the Federal University is produced with federal money. And in Brazil, one of the other things that I would like to share, that every course, OER, or study that is financed, granted, any in the federal government has to be given to all the community for free with an open license. So this is very important because it was already paid. It was paid by public money with our taxes. So everybody has to have access to that material. So I would strongly advise that after 4 years, considering that just after the recommendation, we had the pandemic, and then we had such difficulties for the poor countries and poor societies and groups and communities to access to internet and everything. OER faced difficulties to be adopted in many countries, especially in Brazil. Also, political issues created as problems in Brazil to make better use of OER. I do really believe that OER is fundamental for the democracy of access of education, to the quality of education, to open knowledge, and to open science. So, Zeynep, this is the first thing that I would like to share. The relevance of OER in the health sector. You know that we like to use the hashtag learning saves lives. And we saved lives during the pandemics because we used OER, and all this material is for free and it's open access, open knowledge.
Thank you very much, Carlos. I think you've really highlighted that OER is really about knowledge sharing. It's about being able to knowledge sharing to the point, as you say, OER has saved lives in the Brazilian context, and it's really about the specificities also of sharing knowledge in different contexts, in the health context, health sector, which is actually very specific, very sensitive also, and the different aspects of contextualization, translation, adoption, if you like, of different knowledge between different groups of people in order for it to be useful. Just also to say thank you for outlining that the recommendation actually does address this in its body, because it's really about sharing of knowledge and sharing and this SDGs and moving them forward. And learning is really much more than just SDG 4. It's really about the building of knowledge societies. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to thank you, Carlos. I would like to ask Laure Nivo-Ralamboranto, who is a dear colleague for many years also, and the head of the Department of Technological Innovations and Support for Digital Education in Information Systems of the Directorate at the Ministry of National Education, Madagascar. Nivo is currently working with her team on the ministry's flagship projects for sustainable and coherent integration of ICTs in the Malagasy education system. Nivo holds a Master 2 in Computer Applications, Management, Media Education, e-formation, engineering of distance education from Sorbonne Nouvelle Paris 3, a diploma of expertise from the National School of Administration of Madagascar, and a certificate successful project management from the Project Management Foundation with SADC Bokodol. Laure, the floor is yours.
So I'm going to speak about initiatives taken to implement the recommendation on OER in Madagascar. I'll speak about the areas of activities, the objectives, the stakeholders, and also the feedback from beneficiaries of the resources to promote OERs. The ministry has identified the areas of actions. Then they also indicated the design for OERs. For the creation, it was based on different studies, more particularly the textbook children ratio, and also based on what teachers said, because 1 out of 5 teachers did not have a pedagogical training before starting their career. So we actually focused on OERs for all subject matters that can be used by teachers during their class, and also for learners. There were also self-education resources to enhance the skills of primary school teachers. And they are under different format, PDF, digital, and radio. Now we have different channels based on habits in Madagascar. There are different habits. Only 5% of the population have an internet access. 4.8% of the population has access to power. So on the use of radio, we do not have specific data, but we know that about 58% of the people interviewed during a survey made by Geopol confirmed that at least they listen to the radio once a week. So there are different format of OERs. We use the different channels in order to increase the reach of and access of OERs. We have also a platform for teachers. We also distributed 10,000 tablets for online assets. So we have self-training resources, education resources for teachers and for learners. We also have the digital library. We gathered all resources available, and we also broadcast on radio different resources. What are the parties involved in developing and spreading? We have the teachers, the designers, the learners, but also partners from the Ministry of Communication and other partners, the Ministry of Communication and Culture, and also UNESCO and Orange. The resources are on a self-training platform online, accessible through the internet. We have tablets, as I said, and they can also be listened to on the radio. As far as the figures are concerned, we have about 1,425 resources that were developed for teachers and learners. We have 145 self-training modules, and as I said, we distributed 10,000 tablets, and we have 1 hour 15 minutes program broadcast on the radio. Now, for the feedback from users of our resources, we were able to interview 1,991 teachers who got tablets, and 70% of them think that the resources are really useful, and 77% have used the teaching resources to prepare their class, and 1 out of 2 teachers used them in class. Now, for the dissemination, we have 25 people out of the 115 schools surveyed who answered that they listen at least once the educational programs on radio. Now, in terms of recommendation, I would like to say that there were obstacles, but we realized that we need to involve all stakeholders, first to produce and to disseminate the OERs. And the activity was founded during COVID. And in terms of quality, we need to improve the quality in order to encourage people to use. We realize that teachers actually do use better quality material. So we need to develop a strategy to design and better quality material and disseminate it. We also need to show that the ministry is really focusing on the development and dissemination of the OERs, and we need to encourage teachers, provide incentives for them, maybe some sort of certificates. We need to encourage people to use the OERs developed. So this is where I'll stop, and I remain available if you have questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nevo, it's really interesting to hear about the exceptional work done in Madagascar. I know that you do have a lot of innovations used in other countries, and you also have an OER policy which is well known in Africa and elsewhere. So thank you very much for sharing with us the work done by the government and the Ministry of Education to promote OERs. Now, I'd like to give the floor to our colleague Arnold Magdalene from the University of Nantes.
Here is Arnold Magdalene. He's director of the Pedagogical Development Center of Nantes University, a structure that facilitates the of knowledge, transfer, and networking skills for the benefit of actors, communities, institutions, and companies in France and the territory. He is president of the French section of the International Association of University Pedagogy, a member of ACFAS, a collaborating member of OBVIA, and he is also vice president for the first training organization for social intervention in France, Ascoria, as well as president of the National Network of Support Structures for Pedagogical Development in French Higher Education, Réseau des Filles. He also chairs external evaluation committees for the Agency for the Evaluation of Quality of Higher Education for the Wallonia-Brussels Federation. He's been a member of several steering, evaluation, and review committees for the past 15 years, and was notably co-piloting the 32nd IAUP International Congress in 2022 in Rennes.
Thank you very much, Zeynep. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you to the coalition for inviting me to contribute. I'd like to thank you very much for inviting us. I am actually the spokesperson of Carnil Vernaud, president of our university and the vice president for open education training in our university. And I'd like to tell you where we stand in the operational translation of open education in our university based on UNESCO's recommendation through the consortium. So it's with a lot of modesty that I'd like to actually speak about the first attempts of ownership and the first benchmarks of activities. I'll explain how, as Mr. Jelassi explained earlier on, how we try to take ownership of this. First, I'd like to speak about the context of the intervention and some concepts because I was asked to speak about the methodological framework that we use to support the academic community in the use of OERs within an overall strategy of science for and with society. And then I'll end with some practical illustrations because together with the objectives, everything we implement today at Nantes University is made available on our webpage. So I'll explain all that. Now, what is the background of our intervention? As the speaker from Brazil said earlier on, making possible for the academic community to produce and use OERs is placed within a political project, and our university, through Karine Vernaud, the president, is focusing on knowledge, a society of knowledge, seen as a common good. And this is how we can also say that we have an overall approach at the university that is knowledge accessible by everybody. Now, I am the director of a pedagogical structure whose mission is to train for pedagogical skills, to support pedagogical development projects, to test new ways of disseminating knowledge, and to also give more impetus through research. We intervene at different levels. We, at the macro level, help for strategic decision. We also act to make available training modules, that is at the meso level. We provide support. We also provide support to translate into practice what has been done, that is at the micro level. And we also train our colleagues so that they are more at ease with their activities in our institutions. Now, as I said, for the past 6 years, we do have a program of action which is entitled Open Pedagogic on the Nantes campus. And the objective is to facilitate transfer of knowledge stemming from our research and make it available to civil society. We do have a certain number of activities which are being developed. And you do have this table, which is not easy to understand, so I'll try to take you through it step by step. We do have a major partner, which is the UNESCO chair on OER which is led by Colin de la Rivera, our colleague. He has been for years now initiating a lot of projects around OERs with his team through games, open games, creating OERs with students and more accessible OERs available, adapted. I'd like to say also that Nantes Université has produced a lot of training material accessible to all. We have over almost 5,000 resources created within our university. It accounts to barely 2% of the resources produced by our colleagues, teachers. So now the challenge here is to scale up, which means that everybody should be involved, be it students, teachers, researchers, administrative staff, pedagogical staff. How can we facilitate the transfer of knowledge to civil society? So this is the major challenge. Now I'd like to present what the Pedagogical Development Center's team is developing at the university, making it possible for everybody to feel that they're also involved, and scaling up at the university requires many conceptual frameworks. So maybe I'm moving too fast. So the challenge is to support co-design of capacitating environments. What does it mean? It means that we want to create all conditions so that colleagues are confident to test, to find new communication means, to transfer knowledge from research developed within the university to be used outside the university. So the team of the Center for Pedagogical Development mission is to create first announcements. Where are we heading? To create trust based on testing and learning, creating prototypes, facilitating confidence in the development of OERs, because sometimes our colleagues are raising questions about the use of such OERs. So this is the logical framework that we use.
Ils envisagent eux-mêmes les comportements et les processus dans la création des ressources éducatives, voir en quoi tout cela a du sens pour eux, et enfin, comment cela peut trouver un écho dans leur propre pratique. Nous avons également, donc nous prenons le soin de créer des temps, ce que l'on appelle de dégel, des temps de dégel, c'est-à-dire des temps où l'on va systématiquement autoriser la traduction, c'est-à-dire qu'on va travailler avec nos collègues enseignants pour savoir comment ils se représentent l'éducation ouverte, comment ils se projettent dans l'utilisation des ressources éducatives libres dans leur quotidien avec l'ensemble de leurs collègues. Également, nous nous inspirons de modèles comme le Change Laboratory.
We also draw on the model of the Tinta Laboratory. We accompany our colleagues and we help them implement their vision into apprenticeships and learning. And if they want to move on to producing open educational resources, then we will establish a prototype system, which is a prototype for development. I'm aware, and I apologize for this, that this may all seem rather abstract, but we can say that current educational literature does not provide much information in order for the educational community to be able to take on board the philosophy of open educational resources and the underlying philosophy. So I've given you a very brief overview of these models which are available, and this will be on the slide presentation that will be circulated after this presentation. So I just wanted to present online a few examples of this. As I was saying earlier, what you see here is the strategy of OER, which is supported by the Vice Chair of Nantes University. We have supplied all of our tools, all of our methods, everything that we used in providing this support. And you will see here a strategy that has been produced in conjunction with the teaching community, and you see the main phases. Now, we want to deal both with form and substance. Creating a common good does not mean doing this by oneself. The logic here is that of cooperation, and therefore we have drawn on the potential of the academic community in order to deliver an open education strategy based on the use of free educational resources. What you'll see here is a snapshot of the uses, beliefs, and representations of the academic community regarding open education. This has led us to set up various workshops based on eco-design, and in November last year, we were able to have the strategy validated by the board of the university. So you will see, you'll be able to find all the information on this page, which reflects the mobilization and the demand on the part of the whole academic community in order to contribute to the implementation of an open education strategy based on the UNESCO recommendation. I've spoken about the context. I have given you some concepts, and by browsing on the page on the web, you will be able to find all the current results. I can very humbly suggest that you look at all this, and we'll be happy to share our practices and results, and over the months and years during which we'll be cooperating. Thank you so much, Zeynep, and the floor is yours if you so wish. Thank you, Arnaud. Your work at Nantes University is extremely innovative and is a real game changer. So thank you very much for your very clear presentation. And also, it was very concise. I'm delighted now to introduce a colleague from Geneva, Dr. Barbara Klaas. I have her CV in English, so I will shift to English.
Dr. Klaas is a research and teaching collaborator at the TECFA, Faculty of Psychology and Educational Sciences. She has extensive experience in teaching and quantitative research in the Master's in Science and Learning and Teaching Technologies, and teaches research approaches in the pre-doctoral and for training for research in digital education. Her research interests include teaching and learning research methodology, open education and openness as an emerging paradigm, for example, open science and open societies as well, designing innovative learning experiences with participatory approaches, and specifically design-based research. She works in design-based research as an instructional designer and distance learning coordinator at the Faculty of Translation and Interpreting. She has worked as an instructional designer and distance learning coordinator at the Faculty of Translation and Interpreting since 2004, and as a researcher and instructional designer in digital education for 20 years in international contexts, making 3 major contributions to science. She contributed to open education and open science with research and leadership awards towards making common and opening up diversity of knowledge and cultures through different research methods and training courses. She contributes to training young scholars from the South and North to become responsible researchers. And she's leveraged pedagogies and technologies to take the training of trainers of conference interpreters to the next level with the design and implementation of a blended learning environment at the Faculty of Translation and Interpreting at the University of Geneva. With this, I give the floor to Dr. Klaas, who will speak about OER and the recommendation and implementation at the institutional level at the University of Geneva. Dr. Klaas, please do it.
Bonjour, merci pour cette introduction.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction. I would first of all like to thank the organizers of the coalition for inviting me to share my experience at the University of Geneva and the experience at in Switzerland, and I'm share my experience as a teacher and researcher at Geneva University. First of all, we will take a look at the concept of open, free educational resources. Then I'll tell you how things work at Geneva University in relation to the Swiss situation, and I'll conclude with some best practices on the basis of this experience. Just to point out that, contrary to Nantes University, we are not in the same situation, but we have a very entrenched practice in academic terms. Now, in terminology, regarding terminology, openness, but is one term, and in French we have ouvert and libre. We talk about open education, but free educational resources. Why do we have two terms in this language? Well, there's this subtle terminological distinction, and starting from that, I started to look at the concept of open and free, which underpins free open education. Now, open education is not something new. It was there in the Middle Ages when European universities were set up. Closer to our time, this was very much present in the 70s. And between the interpretation of open, free education in the 70s and the interpretation we have now, we can see the approach has changed, and very quickly. This is very brief, but in the 1970s, we were in a phase of emancipation from any form of constraint in the educational process, whereas now we have a much finer level of granularity, and we focus on content and resources. So you can see what follows, but I would invite you to consider opposing these aspects, contrasting them. The opposite of open is not close. Considering open as an opposite is something that I think is very interesting. After this introduction, I would like to tell you what we're doing at Geneva University. Free open practices have been in existence for over 20 years, and during your own work, you come up with the Tawfik, which was set up by Daniel Schneider in 1970. Open practices exist not only within Geneva University, but there's no institutional strategy at present on open, free education. Conversely, there is an institutional strategy. There's a roadmap on open science, and open science is well implemented and enjoys a lot of support. So if you want to go for open resources through open science, the Rectorate commissioned a report on open resources, educational resources, with the benefit for the institution, for the university, in order to establish an institutional basis. Now, you know how librarians and the library itself are major players in terms of resources. The Library of Geneva University provides a lot of support to open educational resources, and will be holding its next annual conference on this very subject on the 11th of May.
So what occurs at the University of Geneva occurs in a different manner in other Swiss universities. There is a dialogue between the different institutions, and this is also due to the super institutional level, because we have Swiss universities, which actually is the overarching structure, and there's a call for projects for the academic community from 2021 to 2024. There was a project on digital skills, and within the framework of this call, there was an extremely interesting project which was retained, EPFL, which brings together 13 Swiss schools. We have 4 national languages in Switzerland, as you know, and you have different colleges represented in this project. And they're each in charge of one of the dimensions of the project to develop the community, to develop teacher training, etc. And what is interesting, really interesting, is that first, we start with training for digital skills through digital platforms. And this university is also considering the calls for 2025, 2028, and they're also considering a call on free and open education. So these are some examples of what is happening in Switzerland, and you can click on this link to have further details. You have several institutions working on an archive of OERs. There's also research underway on open and free education, on OERs and so on. So to conclude this presentation, we can try to see how what we're doing here can be a source of inspiration for other countries. There are 4 best practices that I'd like to present. The first one is that the recommendation on OERs by UNESCO and the recommendation on open science, because when you speak from the point of view of a teacher and researchers, both aspects are important and they supplement each other. These 2 recommendations are instruments to highlight OERs which exist in institutions and to develop them further. It's a sort of recognition, and they also provide a lever to establish an institutional strategy with some experiences that are underway, as our colleague from Nantes presented earlier on. We also have the second good practice, which is the project approach with the bottom-up and top-down approaches. We have people involved in practice. They come and present projects on the use of OERs. And we have decision makers which make it possible to develop those projects further. The third good practice is really at the core of what happened at the University of Geneva. It's the joint working group with different stakeholders. There were teachers, researchers, decision makers, librarians, legal specialists, people involved in continuous training and initial training, a diversity of stakeholders, enabling us to have different viewpoints, to conduct a mapping of what exists in different institutions, to understand open and free education and understand OERs in a contextual manner. And it's very important to understand that from the different contexts, to define key contextual variables. In our universities, we have the 3C, content, competences, and certification. And in certification, there's also access to training. And it enabled us to create scenarios, to create the future strategy. I'd also like to really highlight the community of practice, national or international. Now, the community of practice of open and free education is really dynamic, and it is supportive. It makes it possible to pool together experiences, to look at what each and everyone is doing, and to actually move ahead in the area of free and open education. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that sometimes there is a tension between substance and form. We really need to heed this aspect because it will improve quality. And to conclude, I would like to invite all stakeholders, researchers, people within communities, civil society, organizations to think about this concept of openness and the concept of free education resources, to understand the scope of this open and free character and what it can bring to education. Thank you for your attention, and I'm available to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Cass. It is really interesting to listen to you. Now, the distinction that you made between open and free is really interesting. That's the first time that I hear that. And thank you for starting with this subtle difference between the two words. We have heard institutions, we've heard health sector, government sector, and we see that the use of the recommendation is diversified. I'd like to know if someone would like to ask questions. Are there comments? Cooperation between Nantes? I'm not sure I understand the question, but there is actually a strong cooperation between Nantes and the University of Geneva. Are there other questions? There is another question. What form? Maybe, Barbara, you can speak about GT-NIM. Now, go ahead. This is an interesting question. We do cooperate at different levels, scientific cooperation. Barbara has presented one. You have also, at national level, different groups which are set up to facilitate cooperation and a network to work on the scientific notion of OERs, more particularly the use of digital in education. And within that context, we had discussions, and there were common joint scientific production within the framework of this inter-institution working groups. And Barbara maybe can come in later on. As far as Nantes University is concerned, we promote them online on our web page. There are networks on best practices in the implementation of OERs and the recommendation how to link up knowledge and society, science and society. There's a lot to be said on that, and there is a lot to be invented. And maybe the person who asked the question can tell us from what institution he or she comes from, and we can continue our discussions. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You can send messages directly to Arnaud and Dr. Klaas. Are there any other questions or points that you wish to raise? No? Thank you all very much. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you, Dr. Jelassi, who's with us a bit earlier, and Arnaud, Barbara, Rahost, all of you. Thank you very much for your presentations. You really raised key points, and you
Zeynep,
pointed out that open education resources really are at the
Zeynep,
basis.
just for 30 seconds, it's just to invite all of you to our 29 ICDE World Conference, which is going to be in Costa Rica. We are going to be talking a lot about OER and the stage of OER in with our members. ICDE, which is the International Council for Open and Distance Education, is an 85 years institution, and we would love to have you at our annual conference in Costa Rica. Zeynep will be there for sure.
Inshallah. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you very much. And I noticed as you were speaking, we have another question from Ms. Brigade McCarthy. Learners outside of school. I think do you mean to need strategies needed for reading for learners outside of school, perhaps?
Je peux tenter une réponse.
Well, I can attempt to answer that one, Zeynep. Now, if I've understood the question properly, we have been talking about within and outside the university, and the formalization of learning out of an or academic environment, and that the person is free to engage in learning in his or her own environment day to day. So this is something that we are working in conjunction with the Nantes authorities on how to establish a learning spaces that can be physical or virtual, or can involve different generations in the community, not only through school or university, but perhaps this can be embodied by other citizens' actions which prove competences. It's an excellent question that in itself would warrant feedback, whereby we can learn a great deal. And this is definitely a citizens' movement. In France, we have mutual knowledge exchange networks, which are part of this whole management and transfer of knowledge between citizens, and which can take shape in many different forms in order to create common goods in new spaces. So all this movement regarding third or external places, creating this new environment where everybody can come along and learn from others and give to others. And this is very much part of the policy of the city of Nantes. And this is something that we wholeheartedly support at Nantes University, namely cooperation with society at large in setting up a forum for learning. Thank you very much, Arnaud, and thank you for taking that question. And thank you for answering in.
But I would like to thank you very much for attending this and taking time from your busy schedules to attend this event. And I'd like to give a very big thank you to our speakers, of course to our interpreters who have been very kind to stay 11 minutes over time. And thank you also to our technicians, and of course to my dear colleagues Aissatou and Eleni, who have been behind the scenes making sure that everything works. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And have a good day and happy Open Education Week. Bye-bye.